You're watching ITG Clips.
Yeah. As excited as I am about having Zach Alley back, I'm just as excited about having Jeff Casteel on that staff defensively. And William Green. We knew about the addition of William Green. He's another guy with a history with Rich. He's played at a high level. He coaches him up on the defensive line, so we expect some really good things from him. But the fact that Casteel's back in the fold, I'm terribly excited. I told Jeff, I was like, hey, now you got to get your place back. I see
I
he
didn't
had
know,
this.
Jed. I didn't know if you'd be more excited to have Casteel or a Trickett back around. I mean, that's a coin flip.
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I'm torn there. That's a really good question. But
Let's just say both. We'll say both.
Yeah, absolutely. I told Jeff because he had this place that he used to stay out Deep Creek. It was kind of his little getaway, a very modest little abode that he used to sneak out to and watch the March Madness. And because it was only an hour from Morgantown or less than that, and him and Jake would go out there and hang out on the weekends. I said, hey, and he sold the place, and I said, see, now you got to buy it back. Here you go. You should have known that. You should have never sold that place. Come on, now you got to buy it back. Of course, I'm always looking for a free place to crash in Deep Creek anyway, so I need you to buy it back, right?
Sure.
But I'm excited about Jeff being back. I'm excited about Travis. I'm just I'm in a good place the way the staff is coming together. It's a great blend. We talked about Mike Joseph. We talked about Chad Scott. What are your thoughts? Do you have an overview? Do you have any high points?
Yeah, I do. I got two things for you. One on the staff as a whole, and one on Chris Haering. So, what do you want first?
Still with Chris Haering.
Okay, perfect. Right here in my backyard in Western Pennsylvania. Jed, when Rich Rodriguez was rehired by WVU, you heard a lot of things. I hope this happens. I hope that happens. I can't wait to get back to this. One of those things, not necessarily at the forefront, but that I saw a couple people tweet, a couple people bring up in conversations, is I hope with Rich back, we get back to recruiting Western Pennsylvania and Florida. That's one thing I kept hearing from people. Texas is great. Georgia is great. Virginia and Ohio are great. But I hope we hit Western PA and we hit Florida like we used to. If you want to hit Western PA like you used to, Chris Haering is a great guy to have around. He coached 17 years at Mount Lebanon, which is a 6A school in Pittsburgh. They are the current WPIAL champions. They just won the 6A title again this year. They are one of the most predominant, one of the most foremost high schools in Western Pennsylvania. They're right there with Central Catholic and North Allegheny and Pine Richland and one of these types of schools that is producing high-level athletes in every sport in a very affluent area of Pittsburgh. He was the head coach there for 17 years. If you don't think that's he, by the way, also coached at Pitt for a few years and Wisconsin, as Jed mentioned. So he is a guy who gets it.
What you're describing, that's what Joey McGuire is doing in Texas. That's the same thing he's doing in Texas.
You'd be hard pressed. I mean, there's Bob Palco and some of these other guys in Western Pennsylvania, right, that have coached at a high level for a long time at big time schools. But you'll be hard pressed to find somebody who's more tapped into Western Pennsylvania football than a guy like Chris Haering, who played high school there, college at WVU, and has been was a part of the head coach of Mount Lebanon for 2 decades, and then coached at Pitt for a handful of years as well, too.
Here's why that's a perfect compliment to what we just talked about. What are the 2 places you named when Rich came back? Hey, we can get back to these 2 areas.
Western Pennsylvania and Florida.
Nobody is more South Florida. I'm telling you right now, Travis Trickett is Don Johnson in South Florida.
And Noel Devine, who you mentioned as well, too, is Noel Devine is a big deal in South Florida.
Travis Trickett owns Miami on a recruiting front. I'm telling you right now, you put him in South Florida, you're bringing some talent home.
You put Travis Trickett down there and you send Noel Devine with him.
Yes.
And then you've got Chris and Jed. Like, I was trying to rack my brain, right? But like those Rich Rodriguez era WVU Western Pennsylvania guys. Like, we're talking Dan Moses, we're talking Rasheed Marshall, we're talking Morty Ivy, we're talking Donnie Barclay, Wes Lyons, Anthony Leonard. I mean, major parts of the success that we had there.
Major
Rich
Harris.
and Major Harris as well too. How could I forget arguably the biggest one?
Yeah.
I mean, there's others too that are from before, like Mark Bulger, but that was before Rich's time, right? Guys like Nick Kwiatkowski, but that was after Rich's time. But man, a big part of that, Rich Rodriguez, and then into Bill Stewart, a guy like Anthony Leonard, who was a big part of that Bill Stewart defense. Those guys were Western PA guys. Donnie Barclay, big part of that Bill Stewart offensive line, and first year of Dana Holgerson offensive line. You want to start getting some dudes back like that. Chris Haering is going to be
let's establish the terms here. People might be saying, well, in the era of the portal, how much does that really matter? Trust me when we say
relationships
it still
matter.
matters. Okay, because here's what you got to do. You're not going to be able to flip your entire roster with that level of risk attached to it every year. What you're going to have to do is position yourself. So when you lose, let's say it's a CJ Donaldson, for instance, this was brought up to me as an example. When you lose a CJ Donaldson, the answer to that loss is on your roster as a freshman that's ready to turn a corner into his sophomore season. And that's when you populate your roster with that level of talent from Southwestern PA or South Florida or different areas that we want to, focus on from a recruiting standpoint. You're still going to need that level of high school player on your roster. Now, it's not the old days of developing talent for 4 to 5 years with 95% of your roster from a retention standpoint and then turning them into NFL players. Those days are gone, but there will still be a certain percentage of your roster that you retain, and maybe not for 4 or 5 years, but you do develop them for 1, 2, 3 years to be the answer to some of the losses that you're going to suffer each year in the portal, which is why you need that adjacency to that Southwestern PA corridor and the talent level. Now, it might not be what it was in the 80s, early 90s.
And I don't think it is, but it's still some of the best in the country.
Back then, you probably had 100 Division I football players. It might be a quarter or a third of that. That's a lot of talent. That's a lot of talent right up the road from Morgantown. There's a lot of Rodney Gallaghers floating around up there. You know what I'm saying? Those types of kids that their family wants to see them play. And look, every time we hear a kid's going to Pitt from Southwestern PA, the reason's always the same. They wanted to stay home. Well, guess what? It's not that far of a drive to Morgantown to see a real crowd and a real program and a real game. Instead of in front of 17 people, you can have an actual college football environment, not far from home. Ask Rodney, ask all these other Southwestern PA kids that did that very thing and went on to big things wearing the old gold and blue.
Watch the whole podcast episode by clicking the link above or in the description.